let me begin the share quickly. Mishnah Brura. So basically by Rabbi Daniel Brody, Rabbi Gary Brody's brother, who does Mayim Achronim first? So it depends on whether they're...
You've got to give me permission for recording, Damon, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Let me just add you.
I can't record.
Okay. Perfect. I've given you permission.
Okay.
So basically in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura, it's both on chapter 181 or section 181. And in Mishnah Brura, it's the 12th subsection, and the Shulchan Aruch, it's the 6th subsection. So we're discussing who does Mayim Achronim first. So it depends on whether there are 5 people or more. The basic rule is this, that if there are 5 people or less, the leader, in other words, the one who will bench, such as if they're making Mazuman, should be given the Mayim Achronim to do first, while waiting for the others to do it. So the leader should scan through the brochas that he will soon be saying, says to build a better meaning of them. Once he is washed, there is no order of precedence for the others. Fine. If there are more than 5 people, everyone else does Mayim Achronim first until it gets to the last 5 people. Once it reaches the last 5 people, it reverts to the rule above that the leader washes first. In order to reduce the time between washing and actually benching for those who wash first, it's recommended to bring more than one Mayim Achronim vessel to the table. So, for example, in a communal lunch where there are lots of people, the others should start doing Mayim Achronim. And once it gets to the last 5 people, the leader should do it. And there's no brocha on Mayim Achronim. But one of the reasons why the main bencher does it last and is because there shouldn't be really a hefsek, a separation between doing it and benching. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, guys. Let's get to the daf. We ended yesterday on 15a2 when we discussed the fact that women and men were equal with regards to rights and obligations. Now we're going to discuss the next part, and it says the following. The Gemara quotes the next statement of the Mishnah. Both the damaged party and the damager are involved in the payment. I repeat this. Both the damaged party and the damager are involved in the payment. Now, does this not seem a little bit peculiar to you guys?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, what's peculiar?
And this is talking about, this is talking about, the story where the guy keeps a carcass and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, but the bottom line is that exact statement. What's peculiar about that statement? Both the damaged party and the damager are involved in the payment.
Well, normally the damaged party shouldn't be involved in the payment.
That's exactly.
Because he's done nothing wrong. But in this particular case, he is, based on what Michael said, because the carcass starts to decay.
Okay, so that's the carcass is one particular aspect of it. But I think Gavin hit it in a nutshell, where anybody that's listening to the shir should immediately be surprised at the fact that they share some sort of cost involved to the damages. In other words, if I'm a damager and I damage you, I should be entirely responsible for the cost. Why should the damaged party be involved in the cost as well? Or should I say take some of the loss? That's the question. So that's the headline of the rest of the daf, basically. And it's going to go into subcategories. Right. So the Gemara cites an Amoraic dispute in which the statement of the Mishnah is cited as a proof. It's been stated that the payment of half damages for Keren, Rav Papa said it's a compensation payment, and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said it's a penalty payment. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about, when we say the half payment damages of Keren, what are we talking about? We're talking about Tam. Is that correct, guys? So what we're saying is, we are saying at the end of the day that there are two opinions. Rav Papa sees it as a compensation payment. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said it's a penalty payment. So we're going to explain the basis of the dispute as follows. So Rav Papa, when he says it's a compensation payment, he holds that ordinary oxen are not in a guarded state with respect to keren damage. Okay? By rights, therefore, the ox's owner should pay for all the damage, but the merciful one took pity on him and reduced his liability for half, because his ox has not yet become muad. Accordingly, the half that he does pay is considered compensation damage by his ox. So the first thing I wanted to do is explain to you what this mean is guarded. When we say that an animal is guarded, we're not saying that the owner has to guard the animal. We're saying that some animals, now this is in Rashi, this is according to Rashi in Ketubot 41a. He's saying that basically that when an ox is in a guarded state, its nature itself would guard it. If it's not in a guarded state, its nature itself does not guard it from doing damage. Am I making any sense or not? If you don't understand, ask me.
No, I've got you.
Okay, so all I'm saying is, Michael, some animals are more reactionary than others. So an animal that's docile, their nature is in a guarded state. They're not in an aggressive state. So your level of watchfulness doesn't have to be as vigilant as an animal whose natural instinct is to kill. Let's take an example of two dogs. If you've got an American pit bull, then you know that dog's breed has a history of aggression. So that ox is not in a guarded state because its instinct is to kill. Okay? When you have, for example, a dog like a Labrador, its nature is far more warm and friendly and docile and kid-friendly. So your nature is that because the animal is self-guarded, in other words, it doesn't have an aggressive nature, your obligation to watch it is not the same as an American pit bull. Does that make sense? And because that's the case, this is the dispute between Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, because Rav Papa is basically saying that ordinarily oxen are not in a guarded state with respect to keren damage. So he doesn't see it as a penalty because you haven't done anything wrong. All right. So basically the payment of half damages, we're talking for tam, for keren damage. There's only tam payment for keren or it's tordels. Rav Papa said it's a compensation payment. And Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said it's a penalty payment. So the Gemara explains the basis of the dispute. So Rav Papa said it's a compensation payment, for he holds that ordinary oxen are not in a guarded state with respect to keren damage. By rights, therefore, the ox's owner should pay for all the damage, but the merciful one took pity on him and reduced his liability by half because the ox has not become muad, and accordingly the half that he does pay is considered compensation done by his ox. So what it's saying is as follows. It's saying in a nutshell that you've cost the person money. So if you've cost the person 300 zuz, that by rights you should be paying the 300 zuz. But because Hashem took pity on the person, because it's not an ox that's done it more than 3 times and the ox has been forewarned, the predictability was unlikely to be foreseen. And on that basis, even though that was the case, that's why there's a certain mercy that you're getting. In other words, the person has lost that money because your ox has damaged their ox. So again, the two leniencies, you pay half the damages by the gufah of the animal. But it's a different case. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said it's a penalty payment because he holds that ordinarily oxen are in a guarded state, and by rights, therefore, the ox's owner should not have to pay at all. So when we say that it's in a guarded state here, we're not saying that the ox's owner has guarded it because otherwise it wouldn't have caused any damage at all, guys. We are saying that the ox naturally, according to him, is not an aggressive animal, so that you can't be expected to pay at all. But the merciful one penalizes him by requiring him to pay half damages in order that he should guard his ox more carefully. Thus, the half damages that he pays is a penalty. So what he's saying is the second opinion, Rav Huna, the son of Yeshua, is basically saying, listen, this nature of this ox is not too damaged. But there's a penalty because at the end of the day, you should assume that something could go wrong. And in that case, it's deemed as a penalty. But we're going to see the halachic implications as follows. So we learned in the Mishnah, both the damaged party and the damage are involved in the payment. Now, this obviously, guys, fits well with the one who said that the payment for half damages is a compensation, right? And I'll tell you why. For this explains how the damaged party is connected to the payment. So what are we saying here? Is that we said, is that according to this view, the ox's owner should by rights have to pay everything, full damages, because he failed to guard his ox properly. So in theory, basically the damaged party is entitled to receive the full compensation for his loss. So since he only receives half that amount, it could be said almost like he's involved in the payment because he's required to forgo half his amount. That's according to Rashi. Am I making sense? So in other words, what I'm saying to you is as follows. When both are involved in the payment, the damaged party should receive the full amount. The fact that he receives half, meaning he's contributing half, in inverted commas, to the payment by taking a 50% loss. Does that make sense? And by taking that, we can understand the verse when it says the damager and the damaged party is involved in the loss. So according to the Rav Papa's opinion, where it's compensation, and the merciful one took pity on him, and the damager only has to pay half payments, we see that the damaged party is now taking half the hit. Fine. That makes sense. But we have a problem now with regards to penalty payments. Why? Because if you say that the penalty payment, according to Rav Huna from who's the son of Rav Hushiah, he's basically turning around and saying it's a penalty. So what does this mean? That it's a penalty? It means you're not entitled to the money. In other words, my ox damages Kevin's ox, for example. Okay? If my ox damages Kevin's ox, and it's saying, listen, this ox is completely calm, and you have to pay a penalty because it's not your fault, but you have to be more vigilant in future. Kevin isn't entitled to any money. Whatever money he got is a bonus. It's gravy. So therefore, how can he be understood as having to contribute to the payment? He wasn't entitled to anything. It's not like if you view it as compensation where you are entitled to it and you have to forego half because I'm being mercifully on my tam ox only having to pay half. On a penalty payment, Kevin's not entitled to anything. He got given that to smack me, the damager, for being more careful. He wasn't entitled to it. So in that particular case, Kevin got a bonus from a halachic point of view. So how does him as the damaged party contribute contribute to having accepted part of the loss of payment or having been involved in part of the cost? And this is coming to Marco's point, because Marco's point is now the depreciation of a carcass. So that's the only thing that you can say, that if it's a penalty payment and he's only getting half of my money for the ox that damaged his and he wasn't entitled to half, the problem is his ox is still dead or damaged. And we're saying in a case where the ox is dead, at that point, that ox is going to start to decay. Does that make sense? Now he's got a problem, because the point of it is while the ox is decaying until it comes to court, that rotting meat or that decaying of meat is Kevin's loss. So even though Kevin's penalty payment to club me as the damager was Kevin's good windfall, the truth of it is he's still technically stuck with a half the loss. I mean, on a real practical basis, even if it's not halachic, but more than that, that the decaying of the carcass that he's got from his animal being dead is now for his cost. It's not for me's It's not for my cost as the damager. So his contribution to paying for damages as the damager's party, as the damaged party or the injured party, is he takes the loss on the carcass depreciation. And what the Gemara is kind of come to say is, yes, but we've learned this before. You're not telling me anything new. Do you get what I'm saying? We've learned this before. Where did we learn this before? We learned this in the case of a pit, where he said, and the carcass shall be his. Remember that? But there, we were talking about a muad case. Remember here we're talking about a Keren case where there's tam and muad. So there are new things that we're going to be learning in this stuff. Again, with the pit, a pit is what? Muad from inception. Michael?
Yeah.
So it's muad from inception. So there we were saying that maybe it's different because the ox also fell into the pit. He was not careful, the owner, because the ox fell in the pit. And maybe therefore, on that reason, the depreciation of the carcass is for the injured party, because maybe he was complicit because he wasn't looking where he was going. In this case, the ox was gored. We might say that, is it true that he still has to pay for the depreciation of the carcass? Now you've got two more factors. You've got tam and muad, which wasn't occurring in the case of the pit, which was naturally muad. Okay. So that's something I wanted to bring to the fore. So I'm going to read this out here. So, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said it's a penalty payment, for he holds that ordinary oxen are in a guarded state. By rights, therefore, the ox's owner should not have to pay at all, but the merciful one penalizes him by requiring to pay half damages in order that the damager should guard his ox more carefully. And thus the half damages that he pays is a penalty. So the Gemara is now going to cite our Mishnah as proof that half damages are compensation and not a penalty. It says, but we learned in our Mishnah, both the damaged party and the damager are involved in the payment. So now this fits well according to the one who says that the payment is half damages is for compensatory damage. For this explains how the damaged party is connected to the payment, meaning that he's entitled to all the payment, but because he only receives half, he in fact has also paid for the damaged as the injured party by half. So now that he takes what is not his by right with regards to the penalty payment, if you want to say it's according to a penalty payment, how can he be said to be involved in the payment? Because whatever he would have received was to his benefit. We are now page 1583. The Mishnah statement is, it's only needed with respect to the depreciation of the carcass that takes place after the animal's death and before the case comes to court. So this loss is borne by the damaged party alone and represents his share of the payment. Okay? So now the Gemara objects. It says, hang on a second. Does the Mishnah here need to teach the rule regarding the depreciation of the carcass? For the earlier Mishnah has already taught this. As the Brisa quoted above explained, when the Mishnah states that he is liable to the payment of damages, it teaches that the owner of the dead animal, in other words, the damaged party, must deal with the carcass and he collects only the balance of its original worth. Okay. So, this was in the Gemara in 10b, if you remember. Just to give you the source. And basically, the Gemara answers, one Mishnah teaches this rule in the case of a tam, and one Mishnah teaches it in need of a muad. And both teachings are needed. Okay? So in 10, guys, can you hear me? I'm hearing a buzzing.
Yeah, fine.
Okay. So what it was saying is that, listen, we need both Mishnahs. One teaches in the case of a tam, and one teaches in the case of the muad. Guys, where did we learn the muad? We learned the muad in the case of a pit in 10b. Where are we learning the case of the tam? Here. This is where we're learning the case of the tam. So we needed both teachings. Why? Because if the Mishnah taught us this rule only in the case of a tam, I might have said that it applies only there. But why? Because the animal that had gored had not yet become a muad. So I might have turned around and said that, listen, this is a first-time offense, and the damager isn't as responsible, and in that case, he's being clapped with a penalty, but he doesn't have to pay for the depreciation of the carcass as well. This animal wasn't actually dangerous. He didn't owe it wasn't compensation. According to how we see it's a penalty. If we interpret it as a penalty and not a compensation, it's not as if the injured party sustained a loss, because he wasn't entitled to anything. So we're saying that maybe then we needed to learn it in the case of a tam, because we figured, okay, it's logical. He's paid a penalty, but he now doesn't have to pay further by paying for the depreciation of the carcass. So in a tam, we can say maybe there was a mercy that was granted to him. And then maybe we can turn around and say that we wouldn't have thought that the depreciation of the carcass would be for the injured party in a case of a muad. Because again, in the case of a muad, it's seen, whether it's seen as a compensatory amount or penalty, this ox was forewarned. And what's the proof? Is that kofir payments are required. Hashem holds you responsible for a muad ox. You've been warned countless times. It's a dangerous animal. It's got a habitual nature of this. And therefore, in that case, you would have thought that maybe the depreciation then for a muad is on the damager and not on the injured party. So that's also a chiddush. Does that make sense? That's why we need both verses.
Yep.
Because it says, for the Mishnah taught this rule only in the case of a tam, I might have said that it applies only there because the animal that had gored had not yet become a muad. But in the case of a muad, I might say that the damaged party does not have to bear the loss for the depreciation. And if the Mishnah had taught us that this rule, only in the case of a muad, I might have said that it only applies there because the owner of the goring ox must pay the full amount of the damage. In other words, including the amount of deterioration of the carcass. But in the case of a tam, where he pays only half damage, I might have said that the damaged party does not have to bear responsibility for the depreciation. Both teachings are necessary. So it's also teaching one other aspect. I could have thought the other way around. I could have thought that, listen, it was enough that he ended up paying half the amount for the ox. Why can't he come to the party and then also pay for the depreciation of the carcass? I mean, he wasn't overstretched here. He didn't have to pay the whole amount. You can understand when he's sweating bullets to pay the whole amount. Maybe he's taxed to the max. But in a case where it's a tam and he only has to have half payment, again, whether you deem it as a penalty or compensation, and halachically it's almost a gift to the damaged party, halachically, the reality is that person's animal died because of your ox and your lack of watching it. Does that make sense? Whether its nature was that way or not. So the person has still sustained a heavy loss. So when you say in the case of a tam, you might have turned around and thought, listen, the guy's paying half damages. I'm sitting here with a dead ox. I've taken a 50% hit. The least he could do is pay for the depreciation of the carcass. So we need both to say, no matter which way you would have thought of this, you basically, the depreciation of the carcass is for the injured party. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. Now, just hang on a sec. Now, Kevin, what time do you have to go? You've got to go now.
In a minute. But if she does, I'm going to take the, in case she cancels, then I'll come back. Okay. We'll still be. I'll go back to listening. But sometimes they cancel the last minute, so I'm not going to.
Listen, we can end off at this. We can end off at this point. We can end off in this point. I just want to end off with one sentence. The Gemara attempts to prove from another Mishnah that damages are compensation, not a penalty. So, guys, we can end off on this point if you're happy. I don't mind.
I'd just like to make a comment. Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
What I find strange is why I know a court case could take a couple of days to take place. So why doesn't the vet then just send a representative to go inspect the carcass and get the carcass sold on the same day, so there's no depreciation in the value of the carcass?
Okay, so that's a good.
So it's a little bit out. It's probably not covered there. It's probably not covered in the Mishnah. But I'm just saying it doesn't make sense that practically that actually occurred, that there was depreciation of the carcass. You know, it just sounds like the systems weren't.
I can give you some examples if you do, give me a chance to answer.
Sure.
Let me give you an example. Firstly, one of the factors you've got to bear in mind is any country who has a court system, there is a huge influx of cases and a limited amount of infrastructure and staff members available to deal with any sort of crisis. Think of hospitals, think of court systems, think of any sort of government throughout the world, whether it's America. The coronavirus should teach you one thing. You take a first world city like New York, in a first world country like America, you would have thought that they could cope with anything that through the national healthcare system off guard. Why? Because you would have thought that they would have prepared for the eventuality of a virus. As it is in America, the court systems are strained. In England, the court systems are strained. In every country, there is a waiting period for a court system. You've even seen, Gavin, from me going to court or you have going to court, that sometimes that for some reason in the legal process, there seems to be delay after delay. So I'm sure you've seen this. Is that you
Absolutely.
And I think it was set up in Western culture so that lawyers can make money. Because at the end of the day, the lawyers tell you, the attorneys tell you that they're on your side. And you know what happens? Your attorney and my attorney, if we're in a case against each other, God forbid, I'm just saying in theory, if Reuven and Shimon are in a case together and they each have an attorney, you know what's going to happen with the attorney? They're going to go for lunch afterwards on a Wednesday afternoon and talk about all their clients, and they've billed them an absolute fortune. They're not on your side, the lawyers. You know how much money I've lost when a lawyer turns around to me and says, I think you've got an excellent chance of winning here. It's like they're reeling in fish. You must be nuts. The best thing I can tell you is to try and settle out of court with an arbitrator or a mediator, etc., because they're like nuclear bombs. You've got yours, I've got mine, but at the end of the day, they destroy everything. And they're the ones that win financially. If you look at any divorce settlement, the lawyers come out on top. If a couple could sort it out amicably, they'd save a fortune. But unfortunately, the reason they can't sort it out amicably is it's because that's why the marriage didn't work. Because if it was amicable, they wouldn't have got divorced. So the lawyers are like bottom feeders. They make a fortune of money, and the court system is backlogged. So let's just say that the legal system in Talmudic times was done completely, which I believe ethically, where the cases weren't delayed. There's still a certain amount of backlog, Gavin. When you've got a Sanhedrin of, for example, 23 judges, okay? 23 judges on capital cases, 71 judges on issues of sedition, going to war, and national-based issues, and 3 judges for monetary offenses and corporal punishment, etc. And you've been dispersed with Babylonia and all sorts of other things, etc. There's a backlog. And the second case of it is there's a natural backlog. The minute you have a bigger population and the amount of people that can deal with your legal case, there's a backlog. Always.
No, but that's why I did qualify myself, and I said that a representative, which doesn't need to be a lawyer.
These are resources. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to bring it to court. They have to wait. They need it to be adjudicated by a third party. And also we said that you can't take it to a commercial butchery and then because you might have a private arrangement. They've got their own arrangement with butchery consortiums to judge the value of a meat. You know, it's not like you're dealing with an insurance broker that can come and do an assessment. The courts are busy. They're not there for you. You're there to try and sort your issue out with somebody else.
No, I know that.
And number two, what happens if it's stuck in the middle of the bottom of a pit? How the heck are you going to extract it? This takes time. Could be down in the pit for 2 days. How are you going to get it up? You've got other things to attend to. Then you've got to schlep and lift it up. And then somebody's got to move it. And what happens if the base den is 50 k's away and you in some farming area in Fosleris? And then you've got to get transport, and then you've got to get the vehicle. Believe me, I can tell you a decaying body deteriorates in the hot sun in a matter of a day in terms of when it becomes putrid. It can suffer financial loss.
They're going to get virtually nothing for that ox.
No, I'm not saying it's going to be the case, because people hang meat in cool areas all the time. All I'm saying is that they're logistical issues, they're court backlog issues, and it's not the based in that should send somebody out there. You have to go to that case, just like no doctors do home calls anymore. You go to a hospital, you go to a court. At the place where they've got infrastructure and mechanisms, they'll deal with it. But if this,
I didn't realize that the best thing actually weighs the meat and does the whole thing themselves.
They don't trust your assessment of it. I mean, at the end of the day, they have a butchery consortium that they deal with to know what the actual value is. The person has to get compensated because they're not expert butchers. You get what I mean? They're halachically and chulin experts. But in terms of retail market-related rates, that might be something that they don't deal with. So they would have to have a consortium that they trust. You know, I mean, it's a complicated affair. And logistics to get the animal there, the heat of summer, who knows? So anyway, I hope I've made this issue clear to
So
them.
those are also costs, Damon, eh? We talk about the injured party. Those are additional costs that he incurs, not just the depreciation, not just half payment if it's done. He's also got the possibly extracting it from a pit. Okay, it won't be come then, but extracting it from a pit if it's more extract, or otherwise extracting it. I mean, having to deliver it from, like what you say, from Fosleris, whatever, to the main high court. You know, so those costs are all tremendous, eh?
No, they are tremendous, but at least in the case of the pit, he's getting full payment. It's only the depreciation. And maybe that then they had relatively quick infrastructure to get stuff out of pits, and the courts were quite near because it's a small town. I'm just saying, I'm just bringing up issues. It might not have been as much depreciation as you would have thought, but there might be a certain percentage.
Yeah. Listen, in those days, the towns were definitely probably a lot closer to each other. And the courts were a lot closer to each other because transport was very difficult.
Exactly.
All
So
right.
listen, they're good questions, but I know it all feels unfair. But listen, China, life's unfair. Nobody's expecting when you're driving on the highway to have a bucky swing and knock off your car out, and the amount that the insurance plays and the schlep and the aggravation and everything. Life happens. But I don't know what to tell you. So,
100%.
listen, I hope today was quite clear. I hope I explained it okay.
No, perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Hey?
Yeah, you too.
Ciao.